Okay, great. Hello, good afternoon. I'm Melissa Giroux, Knowledge Sharing Manager at SpringPoint. Welcome to you all. Very happy to have you here at this presentation and discussion that we at SpringPoint have been very much looking forward to. And we're happy to have our colleagues here from the Center on Reinventing Public Education. They're going to be presenting to us today about the portfolio strategy and what that means for new school design. They'll also be taking questions. But before I introduce them, a few words about our web conferencing space. I see you've mostly found the chat space over here on the left. That's where we'll be taking your questions. It's also where if you have technical difficulties, like if you can't hear us, I hope you are in the chat room and telling us that so we can take care of it. A brief introduction today to the CRPE team. They have my favorite acronym to pronounce, CRPE. And I encourage you to learn more about each of them on their website and to take advantage of the just tremendous resources that they have on that site at CRPE.org. I'm going to briefly introduce them in the order that they're going to speak. First, we have Christine Campbell, who is a Senior Research Director and a Policy Director of CRPE, as she manages the Portfolio School District project. We've also got Paul Hill, the founder of CRPE, who's the author of various books on the portfolio management model, including It Takes a City and Strife and Progress, which we recommend. And Sarah Yasko, Senior Research Analyst at CRPE. Among other things, she leads CRPE's work with the Gates Foundation on District Charter Collaboration Compacts. So welcome, CRPE. We're glad you're here. And I'm going to hand it over to you now. I think first to Christine Campbell.
Great. Well, thanks for having us. We are going to try not to spend too much time on the slides and then try to get to people's questions. So we'll just get started here. I can't see the slide mover. Am I doing it?
Yeah, you
Sorry. Oh. Sorry, technical difficulties. So just to get started and give you a sense of what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to explain the portfolio strategy, and then Paul's going to dig in a little bit more to talk about one of the really key components, which is school autonomy. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the work that we've already done, which was taking a look at what makes districts sort of a promising place for something like the Opportunity by Design initiative. And then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about a possible process that districts might follow to get started. I think I've got this figured out. No, I don't. All right. So the portfolio management strategy is one that redesigns schools really for continuous improvement. So where traditional districts may treat schools as sort of permanent investments that they're going to sort of continually try to tweak and try to solve if they're not performing as well as they should. In a portfolio district, schools are really treated as contingent on performance. So they have an assessment every year that would let both district leaders and community members know how schools are doing. And strong schools continue on, maybe get replicated. Schools that are struggling get some intervention and support, and schools that for several years are sort of chronically low performing are either replaced or closed. And you know, the difference with a traditional district is that there's this effort to maybe think of everything in sort of the one best term. So the best system, the best kind of school, and then just have everything sort of follow that. In a portfolio district, the idea is to really think about an array of options. So many different kinds of schools and therefore many different kinds of needs of support. And then lastly, in a traditional district, the district often is the sole provider of support, ideas, et cetera. And in portfolio districts, the philosophy is to really be open to the very best that's out there, whether it's local or national, and whether it's internal or external to the district. And it's a problem-solving framework, so the idea is that it's a continuous improvement effort where every year schools are assessed, and this year's 10 worst schools perhaps are going to get the intervention, but schools that maybe are good enough today may not be good enough tomorrow and the next year, and so the bar is constantly being raised. New ideas are constantly being sought. So we think of it as a cycle of giving schools autonomy, giving them data, collecting data from them, and offering support, both internal and external to the district, so that they can make the best choices for their school. Also, families get to make the best choices for their students, so offering families whether limited choice in large cities or full district choice. And then assessing school performance, like I said, every year, taking the temperature on how schools are doing. Schools either get an intervention, they either maintain and are pressed to do more next year, or they may get replaced or closed. And that cycle repeats every year. So there are 7 key components to a portfolio district. These are things that we have both generated from within CRPE, but are also very much grounded in work that we do researching districts and finding out what's really working in some of the more mature districts that we're talking with. So there's 7, and they're very interdependent. So it's not as though you can tackle 1 and 2 this year and 3 and 4 next year, but really all of them rely on each other. So the first one is good options and choices for all families. This means families get school choice, that there's an effort to bring in new providers, start new schools, seek from the most entrepreneurial talent that's already within the district to open new schools. But this idea that the district is wanting to have an array of great options in every neighborhood for every family. School autonomy is very important. This is autonomy both for the use of funds, being able to bring in talent and choose the right fit for the school, choose the right curriculum for the school, choose the right supports for the school. And Paul's going to spend a little more time talking about autonomy after I'm done. The next idea is pupil-based funding. So this is that funding follows children. It's not based on a staffing model of paying for the positions in the school, but actually following enrollment and the needs of students. And that principals and schools have control over this money, and that a significant portion of funds from the district are actually housed in the schools, not being spent on behalf of the schools. Talent-seeking strategy, this means bringing in the best principals and teachers from, as far as it can be attracted, and at the same time developing people within. Sources of support, we've talked a little bit about this, but when you have a really diverse supply of schools, this means that providing one kind of PD or one kind of curriculum, that's not going to work for these schools. So maybe the district plays the role of vetting great providers and then letting schools choose and purchase the support that they need. Performance-based accountability, we've talked a little bit about that, but schools basically live or die based on how they do, and an array of metrics can be used to measure this, both growth and actual achievement, school climate, and that these are assessed every year, and that the criteria are very clear both for schools and the public. And then lastly, extensive public engagement, that these strategies are complicated. They're usually, they bring about some conflict because everything is put on the table. And it's important that districts are able to communicate what their plans are and provide very clear communication internally to staff and principals, teachers, and then also to families in the community and then be open for feedback and tweaking so that the strategy reflects the interests and needs of the community. I'm going to turn to Paul now, and he's going to talk a little bit more about this very important piece about school autonomy, which really unleashes innovation in districts. And it's complicated and can be something that seems true, and then actually there's more barriers that pop up. So he's going to talk a little bit about how the 10 principles of this initiative are supported or not by autonomy.
Thank you, Christine. This is going to be in the hard lessons department. The one thing we've learned, can we change this slide?
Oh, yes, sorry.
One thing we've learned from not only the portfolio districts, but other efforts to create innovation in public school districts is that you can't get the innovations you want without making it clear what freedoms the people who run a school are going to have. One advantage of chartering, of course, is that that's all part of a legal framework, but you can get innovation inside public school systems, but it isn't just by hoping. There has to be some clarity about what the people in the school can do that varies from the district norm. And it's lethal to set up a situation where people in the school think they have freedoms and they experience a not-so-fast Joe problem where every time they try to do something that they thought was included in their commission, they're stopped from doing it. That quickly creates a greater level of resentment than you started with, and is not a good thing. And further, we've seen that often school-level people and district-level people in the midst of apparently an agreed-upon innovation strategy will have profound differences in expectations about what the school can actually do and who has to chop off on it before it's able to do those things. So I want to talk about those things today. In this chart, basically, most of the information is along the top line. We're talking about the 5 of the essential freedoms to get the kinds of innovation that are needed by this project and others. They include freedom to spend money, and obviously that doesn't mean that the school has to have all of its money in cash to spend, but it has to be clear what spending it can do, what it can't. School has to have freedom to assemble a staff of people who actually want to do the reform and will not constantly be pulling in another direction. Obviously, if you want to change the student's experience, that means time and methods have to be used differently. That has to be a freedom that's clearly established from the beginning. And similarly, schools have to be able to choose where they get help, whether from networks or other sources, and also have to be able not to attend or pay for district-provided professional development and other activities that are totally irrelevant to what they're doing. So if you look down, I have tried to give an indication of, and you'll notice that I have done some reordering of the 10 essentials of what kinds of freedoms need to be explicit for a school when it's actually trying to create youth-serving and much more effective approach for children. And again, I'm not trying to say they have to have total freedom in these areas, but they have to know what their freedoms are, and the freedoms they get have to be squared with the degree of expectation of change they're supposed to make. I'm glad to go back to that if people want to talk more about it. Let's go to the next slide. This is continuing on the hard lessons department. One thing we've learned in portfolio districts is that schools are often guaranteed freedoms which turn out to be undercut or nullified by central office actions. For example, a familiar freedom is if you got a teacher vacancy, you can hire anybody that is eligible regardless of their level of seniority. But wait a minute, Joe, the union has to approve your choice. Or you have a budget you can spend to develop your program, but it has to go through the procurement office, and they may bundle it with other requirements and put out an RFP and not get the service paid for until a year after you want it. And so not only do you need to think about what are the positive statements of what schools can do, but also the statements about what the union or the central office can't do to undercut it. And on the left-hand side, the right-hand column, the middle column, talks about things that probably do have to be kept in place. Schools do have to make reports. They do have to do the usual data requirements. Often schools are not totally free to hire teachers that are not certified. Often schools have to make proposals about what freedom they want on their time and methods in advance, which is the case in this program, and those do constrain the freedoms that schools have once they get their approvals. But the point is that once a plan is approved, then it should not be subject to constant review and reversal in the central office. And finally, services need to be things that schools can purchase according to need, not district policy. And then on the right-hand column, a set of statements about things that need to be set outside the purview of the district and the union. And the last thing I want to say is that there's a lethal problem in decades of school reform has been the tacitness of these agreements. Everybody says, oh, if my school is allowed to do X, it means that we won't be stopped from doing it. And that's generally not the case. And so there needs to be an explicit agreement on both sides of this table that includes both the central office and the union and the school. And here I'm not trying to suggest that each of those entities should have equal power to define it, but the district has to be sure that it enforces the freedoms that it said it was going to enforce. That's why, for example, in portfolio districts, we often talk about the need for having a chief transformation officer who is basically the fixer who makes sure that a school isn't re-regulated by stealth. So now, turn it over to Sarah.
Okay, so that's hopefully now that makes what a portfolio district is a little bit clearer for some of you. And I'm going to talk for a minute about our research in portfolio districts across the country. So as anyone knows who's spent any time in central office in a school district, traditional school district, the portfolio management model represents tremendous change. And what CRPE has done over the last near decade is look at districts who have engaged in this model or who have decided to implement this model, and we watch how they make the shift, and we research how they've made these changes in the office, specifically how they've been able to provide the autonomy that the schools need in order to innovate and in order to create variation across the district via their autonomy. But that's not the end of the portfolio management model, and I think one of the things we've learned in conversations in districts across the country is that I think people do often think that that is the portfolio model, that it's a various provider model. It's making sure that there's diversity in schools, and while that's obviously, as Christine said, an important part of what the portfolio strategy is, it must be coupled with the accountability system and the support. So the district's role doesn't completely go away, of course. There are important things the district must continue to provide to the schools, including the supports, and that's evident in this initiative as well. And the accountability is also key. So the continuous improvement model can't work unless the schools are held accountable and that they close if they are not, once they've been provided the support and still unable to meet the needs of their students, that they close and make room for new models. Can somebody help me with this slide? Thanks. So I know I have it on my computer somewhere, but so given that CRPE has spent all these years watching districts wade in or jump in or everything in between to this portfolio management model, Carnegie believed that in introducing this initiative, portfolio districts would stand the best chance of being able to implement it successfully. So that's why CRPE was brought in order to look at you all and to assess whether or not you were ready, that you had the capacity in your districts to be able to pull this off. So This is the rubric that I followed as I visited each of the districts. I made sure that, or I asked questions around, and to a certain extent, of course, we already knew all of you through your participation in the portfolio network meetings and through various endeavors that we have going with all of you. So I asked you questions around flexibility. So that's really the autonomy piece again. The hiring, student-based budgeting, all those flexibilities that schools need in order to be able to innovate and to succeed. Whether or not you are able to use external partners in schools. So you probably remember I asked questions around whether or not external partners can work in the schools, can have access to student-level data, can teach credit-earning courses. It's also important, obviously, for this initiative that the schools and the district have the infrastructure, the technology infrastructure necessary to pull off what will be, in essence, a blended learning model. We also wanted to make sure that there was the accountability piece that, again, is so important in portfolio districts, that schools could know how they were doing, that the district was able to provide them real-time feedback on how students were faring in the school. Well-defined policies on school freedom, again, I'm not going to reiterate that. That's really what Paul spent time talking about. And then, obviously, Carnegie cares that the initiative be successful and that these schools that there is the ability of the district to replicate the schools. And then lastly, perhaps most obviously, that the regime in the district is stable, that the initiative won't be introduced and then there'll be a turnover in leadership and it die there. So that's what I was asking. Now my next slide. Oh, I'm going to ask Christine to actually brief this slide. If she could, I'm passing the microphone back to her.
So we've spent some time talking about sort of the philosophy of portfolio districts, and as Sarah mentioned, we spent a lot of time studying these districts and helping them move forward by generating new ideas. They've had a lot of practice, many, in replacing and closing schools and coming up with new school designs, and some of that is simply replicating a great school, simply. So that doesn't necessarily mean innovating a new idea, but some of the districts that are in this design initiative already have processes in place, and others are just developing them. So this slide here is really just a potential template for how a district might get started thinking about a process for this initiative. So the first thing would be to conduct a broad search for entrepreneurial school leaders. So I think, most district leaders have, a Rolodex of people they know who they imagine would probably be good at doing this. But we're sort of pushing people to think broader than that and really kind of announce the initiative and make sure that everyone knows about it, and then be really broad in seeking the best kinds of people, because that's really the mindset of the portfolio model, which is not just going with the known, but really being open to the best people that are out there, and you may not know them yet. So coming up with a process to gauge the potential leadership in the district and their interest in the 10 design principles, and really seeking out a handful of people who you think would be a really great leaders for this piece. And then allowing planning time and providing support. So, that's really what this R&D initiative is all about, giving people the space to get out of the daily work-a-day and get down to the idea of thinking if, kind of a blue sky environment, if we could do anything we wanted, what would it look like? And kind of guiding it with the 10 principles, but really thinking very differently about what school will look like for students. And then being a good authorizer. So really providing a rigorous screen on the models that are proposed by this group of design leaders. And we were thinking you might come up with a committee of people who really understand organizational coherence, instruction, the best ideas in blended learning, and have them be the judges or the sort of quality control on which designs seem to have the most merit. And then once a school design is chosen, that, as Paul mentioned, there really needs to be somebody who protects it from the creep of policies and barriers and restrictions that make life simpler for folks in central office, but really make it much harder for people who are trying to do something different. And then lastly, really playing the role of oversight and accountability. So fitting these new models in with all the other schools and not protecting them from failure, that they have the same accountability that everybody else has, and the onus really is on them to show that this design is a great one, that it's doing what it promised, and that students are learning.
Speaking of technology infrastructure, we're pushing a large speakerphone across the room as we talk. Just to finish up by summarizing a little bit about what CRPE's role is in this initiative. So as I said, I'm not going to reiterate bullet number 1. That was what I talked about earlier. But we're also, as the work moves forward, hoping to support the districts to address the barriers. So I was in the convening in New York, I was in the room with Denver, and the term that they choose to use was weed whackers. So this is ensuring that the districts got the weed whackers in place to really knock down those barriers that exist, that we all know exist in the traditional governance system in districts. We're also using our time on the initiative to do some analysis across the sites and to figure out what the national lessons are for some publications and writing. And then more sort of detailed, we will be providing scholarships to folks to come to the portfolio network meetings as folks who are engaged in the initiative. We'll also create contacts between you all, and will be the bridge between cities to facilitate problem solving. So if one or another city is figuring some aspect out in a way that we think would be helpful for the others, we'll share that information. We'll encourage you all to talk to each other. We'll also provide the districts twice a year with feedback on how we see their work progressing, and help them strategize on how the central office might change even more to better support the redesign efforts. So that's the end of our presentation. We're just about halfway into our time, so there's plenty of time for questions.
On the journey with us as we move ahead. Thanks for coming, and I'll be sending out the link. Remind your colleagues to listen.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot, you guys.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.